Hello there. I've never recorded a YouTube video before, but here I am. I'm no one significant. I'm someone who is not an expert in philosophy, epistemology, philosophy of religion, or anything. I'm just someone who is interested in the topic and who those topics are extremely important personally for. I'm someone who currently identifies as a Christian, but does not trust the Bible, as the title of this video says, and I'm going to explain why. Now, this video is going to have 3 sections. The first section is going to be about how we know things, what I think we can know. The second part of this video is going to be about the Bible specifically, and history and the resurrection of Jesus. And the third part of this video is going to be me talking about my current situation, my current intellectual problems, I would say. So first, how do we know things? I believe the word for that is epistemology. I'm not sure if I'm using that word correctly, which is why I'm just going to say how we know things for this entire section of the video. Now, I have 3 ideas about knowledge and what we can know. And the first is that we cannot really know anything for sure. And that applies to literally everything except for maybe one exception, which is conscious experience. I don't think we can deny conscious experience. Maybe the laws of logic, I hear those are debatable too. But everything else I think we cannot know for certain. For example, I'm sitting on a chair right now, or at least that's what my senses are telling me. My conscious experience says that I'm sitting on a chair. My eyes tell me I'm sitting on a chair. My sense of touch tells me I'm sitting on a chair. Does it logically follow from that I'm sitting on a chair? Technically, I don't think it does. What it tells me is that there is evidence that I'm sitting on a chair, not that I am sitting on a chair. For example, it could be a possibility that the government has sent a quadrillion little micro drones to form in the shape of a chair to support just me in this cute little dorm room. But I know that's very, very unlikely. But can I disprove its possibility? I have no way of doing that currently. I have to acknowledge that at the very least, it's a super, super, super slim possibility. But still, it's a possibility, and because it's a possibility, I cannot know for certain that I am sitting on a chair. This doesn't only apply to observations, it also applies to some beliefs, like let's say flat Earth. A lot of people will say there's no chance that the Earth is flat, but trivially, if you are where you are right now, you're not in space, you cannot see the Earth. I think that if you're intellectually honest, you have to at the very least acknowledge that it's a possibility, no matter how slim the possibility is. That all the scientific evidence, all the photos you've seen of the Earth that point towards the Earth being flat are faked by the government, something like that. You have to acknowledge all of that being fake and untrue is a possibility, even if we think that possibility is super, super slim. Is there a possibility that the Earth is flat? Technically, I think yes. I currently have no way of disproving that from where I am. But that's another example of this point. The second point about how we can know things, what we can know, is that everything can be interpreted as evidence for some idea. For example, my sensory inputs of me sitting on a chair, which I am sitting on a chair, in case you wanted to know that. Or at least I think I'm sitting on a chair. But yeah, my sensory inputs that point to me sitting on a chair can be interpreted as evidence that I'm sitting on a chair. The vision, the sensory input that I'm looking at my hand, and the sensation of me holding up my hand can be seen as evidence that I have a hand. And I think that anything, literally anything, can be seen as evidence for something. Again, for flat earthers see that the Earth is flat from where they are. It's relatively flat. They're not flying off of the Earth as it supposedly spins around, and so they deduce from that, hey, this is evidence that the Earth is flat. And that's fine. But that's my second point, which is that anything can be seen as evidence for anything. And my third point goes along with this quite well, is that a belief is formed when an individual is sufficiently compelled by the evidence that they have received to believe in that belief. And a belief is just a statement about what somebody thinks is true. So, for example, I have sensory input of there being a chair. That I see as evidence as there being a chair, and my brain is sufficiently compelled by that evidence for me to believe that there is a chair, probably. And for flat earthers, they see the evidence they have for there being a flat earth. They are sufficiently compelled by the evidence to believe there is a flat earth. For people who are religious, they have evidence that their religion is true, and that evidence compels them to believe that their religion is true. But my 3 points remain the same. 1, it is impossible to know anything with full certainty. 2, anything can be seen as evidence for something. And 3, a belief is formed when somebody is sufficiently compelled by the evidence to believe in that belief. I'm sorry if I was talking quite fast. I wanted to get through that part of the video quickly so I can move on to the more interesting part, which is about the Bible and history. Now, what is history? Well, history is a practice that has the goal of deducing what probably happened in the past. I don't think that's a controversial definition of history. That should be fine. And people historize, I don't know the verb for history. People do history by looking at evidence and interpreting the evidence to find what probably happened, to find explanations for the evidence. Now, what is the Bible? The Bible, at face value, without assuming anything supernatural about it, is a collection of historical documents. That's the Bible. And at the very core of Christianity, which relies on the Bible, is the idea of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The idea that Jesus came down to earth to die for our sins and then rise from the dead is extremely important. It's at the core of the religion of Christianity. And so, when I did trust the Bible, I believed that the resurrection was true because you could prove that it was true based on history, based on using the Bible. And what was it? I was listening to a debate between Bart Ehrman and William Lane Craig. And it was essentially that one debate that did convince me that I can't actually trust in the resurrection based off of history and the Bible alone. And here's why. I have 3 points. Again, because I guess I like threes and I like points. What's the first one? Problems with believing the resurrection based on the Bible. Number 1, I have trouble ruling out possible explanations with confidence. This is very true. And this might just be something about my personal psychology, but I just can't rule out things. For the resurrection, the main argument used to support it historically is something called a minimal facts argument. I believe this was popularized by Gary Habermas. And the idea is that there are some historical facts that can be determined to be almost certain to be true. And that by trying to find the best possible explanation of all these facts, you will find that the best possible explanation for them is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, an example of a few of these facts would be, let's say that Jesus died via crucifixion on a cross, that there was an empty tomb, or that the tomb that he was buried in was supposedly found empty a few days later, that his disciples or people claimed to have seen Jesus after he died, that Christianity suddenly spiked in the region very soon after Jesus supposedly rose from the dead. Facts like that. And so Christians will say that the most plausible explanation for all those facts is that Jesus rose from the dead. However, of course, people have come up with materialistic explanations for those things. When it comes to disciples seeing Jesus after he died, some possible explanations would be grief-induced hallucinations, or when it comes to the group appearances, many people might say, that those instances never really happened. People were just saying those, that the accounts themselves are untrue and unreliable, things like that. When it comes to an empty tomb, people might say that disciples didn't know where he was actually buried, or that there was a grave robbery that occurred, because grave robbers were apparently popular at the time, and people just didn't know where he was buried at all, things like that. And what Christians will say in response to things like this is that the combination of all of those materialistic explanations for specific facts combined would be extremely, extremely unlikely. And that because of that, a resurrection from the dead is more likely. And that confuses me, because even as unlikely as those materialistic facts put together might be, a resurrection from the dead still seems unlikely. And so my brain cannot rule out the materialistic explanations on the basis that they are unlikely. A resurrection also seems pretty unlikely. And that goes into the second problem I have, which is that I don't know how to weigh the plausibility of supernatural explanation in comparison to materialistic ones. Simply because if a resurrection happens, it is a miracle, and by definition, this is the point that Bart Ehrman made in his debate against William Lane Craig that convinced me, is that a resurrection is a miracle, and miracles by definition have to be like the most unlikely thing to occur. Otherwise, they're not miracles because they happen regularly. And what that means is that if this resurrection would occur, then there would be no precedent for us to know how likely it is, because it would be like the only time it happened. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a miracle. And so, for a miraculous supernatural event that has no precedent, how are we meant to know that? Or how are we meant to know how likely it is in comparison to any materialistic explanations? Even if the combination of materialistic explanations for the specific facts of Jesus' resurrection are super duper unlikely, let's say 2% likely out of 100. How do we know that Jesus rising from the dead is any bit more likely than that because it's a miracle? Now, what some Christians might say is that, well, if you don't have God in the picture, of course you're going to say it's unlikely and that materialistic explanations are more likely. But I think even with God in the picture, we don't know how likely it is that he would raise someone from the dead, unless we assume the Bible to be true or have very heavy prejudice in favor of the Bible being true. But let's say at the very least there is a God who can raise people from the dead. How do we know, without any precedent, how likely it would be that he would raise anyone from the dead, that he would raise this specific person from the dead at this very time? I don't think we have any way to know that for sure. And because of that, I simply have no way to measure and to compare the resurrection of Jesus as an explanation of the evidence versus materialistic explanations. And the third problem I have is that even if I think something is the most plausible explanation, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to automatically believe in it. As I said earlier with my third point about knowing things, what did I say? Yes, a belief forms when an individual is sufficiently compelled by the evidence for that belief. I can rationally think that Jesus being raised from the dead is like very plausible, more plausible than materialistic explanations. But I'm just not compelled by the evidence to believe that it is actually the case, to believe that it did actually occur. And that might just be a personal psychological thing again. But that's just a truth. It's a problem I have. Even if I think something is the most plausible explanation, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to believe in it. One fun analogy I came up with is that I imagine let's say I'm sitting on a somewhat shaky ledge, but I'm still standing on it. And I want to get off of the ledge. But I'm on the ledge, and there were a few possibilities I see. There's like a couple stairways that go down from the ledge that'll let me get back to the ground. Now, I obviously want to find the ledge that's very stable, but let's say all these staircases look super dilapidated, they're all going to crumble. But one looks slightly less dilapidated than the other ones. Now, I'm still not necessarily going to step on that staircase for the chance that it's going to crumble beneath me and I'm going to fall to my death. Even if I think it's more stable than the other staircases, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to step off of the ledge that I'm sitting on. And that's essentially what I think is happening with these explanations. Even if I think one explanation is maybe more stable than the other ones, I'm not going to step off of my ledge and be compelled to believe in that. And so those are my problems with believing in the resurrection based on the Bible. That's why I don't trust the Bible as the foundation for Christianity, personally. Now, moving away from history, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Bible in itself. Now, one thing I heard a lot when I was growing up is that the Bible is an ultimate authority and that it sustains itself. I don't believe that anymore, because the main argument I heard was something like, all ultimate authorities, all objective truths, are going to be self-sustaining because you can't go any deeper than that. So they're an automatic truth. And because the Bible claims to be true, it's an ultimate authority. That's just circular reasoning. Because it assumes the Bible is an ultimate authority, and because it claims to be true, then it's an ultimate authority, but that assumes it. It's very circular. I don't think that the Bible sustains itself. Now, a lot of reasons why people believe in the Bible is because of personal testimony. It's because they're compelled by the coherence of the Bible. I don't really have the personal testimony part yet, and that's a problem, and it pisses me off. But that's fine. Now I'm going to talk about... now we're going to the third and final part of this video, which I have labeled in my notes. How am I a Christian? Yes, I say I identify as a Christian, because technically, I am an agnostic who heavily leans towards Christianity. So, haha, you got clickbaited. Bwahahaha. But I identify as a Christian because I do think it's very plausible. Now, I do admit part of the reason I think it's very plausible is because I'm very nostalgically and sentimentally attached to Christianity. I was raised in the church, and I have very positive memories of Christianity as a religion. It gave me a great community, and I'm aware that this is not the case for everyone, but it's the case for me, and it's why I've always been drawn to Christianity. It's why after I deconverted from Christianity, I was always trying to get back intellectually. And so I do have this path of reasoning that I kind of devised that's not very concrete at all, but I have a little paper on it. I can put the link in the description. It's not very well written, but it is what I am basing most of my personal beliefs in Christianity off of. It's what I think is the most plausible version of Christianity, and it's not based in the Bible at all, because, of course, I don't think we can trust the Bible. But when it comes to my agnosticism, now, I do technically think that everyone, or at least most people, are agnostic. But I imagine it on the scale, right? And so if you're on one end of the scale, you believe Christianity. If you're at the other end of the scale, then you believe in atheism very strongly. You don't think there's a God. You believe there is no God. I think anything in between is agnosticism. And as I said in the first part of the video, I don't think that there is any way to know that anything is true for certain. I think that if you're intellectually honest, you should always acknowledge that there is a possibility that what you believe is not true. Like, most Christians I ask do end up agreeing with me that, yeah, there is a possibility that Christianity is not true. But they just believe in it because they're convinced and compelled by the evidence, which is perfectly good reason to believe in Christianity. But what that means is that they are technically an agnostic, but an agnostic who leans very heavily towards Christianity. Like super heavily, so they're a Christian. Now, I am agnostic, but I'm not super far in the Christianity camp. I'm more in the middle, but leaning Christianity. And I identify as a Christian because I try to live as a Christian. I go to church, which I know doesn't mean that I'm a Christian. I go to small groups. I try to pray every day. The main thing I'm looking for right now is either a spiritual experience or a spiritual revelation or realization, something like that, to show me that Christianity is true. Because where I am right now tells me that intellectually I cannot know if Christianity is true. Historically, I can't. When it comes to stricter reasoning, I don't think logic is the most concrete thing either. I still, with my reasoning, think there's always possibility I could be wrong. I think the only thing that could make me think for certain that Christianity is true is something like a spiritual experience. And so, that is what I'm searching for right now. If you're a Christian, I would appreciate prayers for me, because I'm praying for myself. I'm praying to become more Christian. That is what that is what's happening for me right now. If you're not a Christian, you just heard me rant about how I don't trust the Bible and things. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to see if I want to make more videos. I think I want to make some videos based off of the paper I wrote about what I believe is the most plausible version of Christianity without relying on the Bible as of right now. I don't know if I'm going to get to that. This is my first attempt of recording something. So if it's not the best quality, which it's not, forgive me. This is just a lot of my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed hearing about what I think about things, where I am philosophically when it comes to Christianity. I did make this video so that I would not have to explain as much to people what I think about Christianity, because I have found that lately, since this deconversion thing only happened about, a year and a half ago, I've been explaining this to a lot of people, and it's gotten a bit repetitive. So I wanted to make this video to summarize my thoughts, and so that I could just send people a link and be like, hey, listen to this, and this basically just summarizes my beliefs about stuff. And so, yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye. Yay.